had studied 17 different species during his career as a military observer. He had watched the proud warriors train with their energy blades. He had analyzed the Vesper hive mind's perfect coordination in battle simulations. He had documented this mathematical approach to warfare, where every move was calculated 3 steps ahead. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for humans. The training deck of Station Omega-7 was cold and sterile, just like every other Coalition facility. Stood behind a protective barrier, his 3 eyes focused on the simulation arena below. His slim, gray fingers moved across his data pad, recording everything he saw. This was his job: watch, record, and understand. The Coalition wanted to know how humans fought. They wanted to know if these newcomers could be trusted as allies. Captain Minu stood at the edge of the arena, arms crossed over his chest. He was not tall by human standards, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. His dark eyes watched his soldiers prepare for the simulation. Next to him stood Lieutenant, checking her tactical display. She was sharp and efficient, always 3 steps ahead in planning. Had learned that was the brain behind many of their strategies. "Begin simulation," Minu said calmly. The arena transformed. Holographic enemies appeared, surrounding a group of 10 human Marines. The scenario was simple but brutal. The Marines had to hold a position against overwhelming odds. Had seen this simulation before. They would form a defensive circle and fight with honor until they were overwhelmed. The Vesper would retreat in perfect formation, minimizing losses. They would calculate the impossibility and surrender to preserve life. The humans did something different. Corporal, a stocky Marine with a scar across his cheek, shouted orders to his squad. Instead of forming a defensive position, half the squad charged forward. They ran directly at the enemy, weapons firing. The other half held the position, creating a crossfire. It was aggressive. It was reckless. 3 simulated Marines died in the first 30 seconds. His fingers trembled as he recorded the data. "Unacceptable casualties," he muttered to himself. But the humans did not stop. When one Marine fell, another took his place. When their ammunition ran low, they switched to hand-to-hand combat. Private, a young woman on her first deployment, was hit twice but kept fighting. She threw herself at an enemy, bringing it down with her bare hands. The simulation ended with 7 out of 10 Marines dead, but the position held. "Reset," Minu said, no emotion in his voice. They ran it again, and again, and again. Each time the casualties were different, but the result was the same. The position held. The humans never retreated. They never surrendered. After the 5th run, could not contain himself. He approached Captain Minu during the break. The other Coalition observers had left hours ago, unable to watch the humans sacrifice themselves repeatedly, even in simulation. "Captain, I must ask," said his translator, converting his words into human language. "Why do you accept such losses? The doctrine suggests that any scenario with predicted casualties above 30% should result in tactical withdrawal." Minu looked at him with those dark, tired eyes. "Observer, right?" "Correct." "Tell me something. What happens when there is nowhere to retreat to?" Blinked his 3 eyes in confusion. "Then you negotiate, you surrender, you preserve your people for another day." Stepped forward. She had been listening to the conversation. "And if the enemy does not negotiate, if they do not accept surrender, if their only goal is complete destruction?" "Then you have already lost," said. "It is logical to accept defeat and minimize suffering." Minu smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That is where we differ, observer. Humans do not accept defeat easily. Sometimes you fight not because you can win, but because the alternative is worse than death." "I do not understand," admitted. "You will," said quietly. "Hopefully, you will never have to understand." The training continued for weeks. Watched humans practice scenarios that no other species would even consider. They trained for ship boarding actions where casualties would be 90%. They practiced last stand protocols, where the goal was not survival but making the enemy pay the highest price possible. They ran drills where squads had to choose which members would sacrifice themselves to save the others. Private approached one day in the station's observation lounge. She was young, maybe 22 human years. Her hands shook slightly as she held her drink. Had noticed she always seemed nervous. "Observer," she said softly. "Yes, Private. Can I ask you something about your people?" "Of course." "Have they ever been in a war where surrender was not an option?" Thought carefully. "No, we have always had the option to negotiate or withdraw. It is the foundation of our survival as a species." Nodded. "I envy that. Humans have not been so lucky. Our history is full of times when surrender meant extinction, when negotiation meant slavery, when retreat meant watching our families die." She looked out at the stars through the massive window. "We learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when it is hopeless, because if you do not, you lose everything." "But the training scenarios," said. "You know many of you will die. Why volunteer for certain death?" "Because someone has to," said simply. "If everyone runs, everyone dies. But if some of us stand and fight, maybe some of us survive. Maybe our families survive. Maybe our species survives." She finished her drink. "It is not about being brave, observer. It is about doing what must be done." Before could respond, the station's alarms began to scream. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the corridors. His data pad lit up with priority alerts. He read the message and felt his blood run cold. The Howler swarm had entered Coalition space. They were heading toward Haven's Reach, a colony world with 3 million inhabitants. The message was clear and terrifying. The Howlers had never been defeated. Every species that had tried to fight them had been destroyed. Standard protocol was immediate evacuation and retreat. Looked at, the young woman's face had gone pale, but her jaw was set. She was afraid, but she was not running. "All personnel to battle stations," Minu's voice echoed through the station. "This is not a drill. The Coalition fleet is assembling. All ships prepare for immediate departure." Watched the humans move with purpose through the corridors. They were not panicking. They were not celebrating. They were simply doing their jobs. He thought about what it said. Someone has to. He updated his report one final time before the fleet departed. His conclusion was simple but troubling. Humans possess a fundamental difference in military psychology. Where other species fight to win, humans fight because they choose to fight. I do not yet understand why this matters, but I suspect I will learn soon. The Howler swarm will test these humans in ways no simulation can predict. I fear what I will witness, but I must observe. The fleet began to assemble, 47 ships from a dozen different species. Among them 3 human vessels, small, outdated, but crewed by beings who trained for impossible scenarios. Boarded the indomitable Captain Minu's ship to continue his observations. As the ship left the station, he looked back at the peaceful structure one last time. Something told him that when he returned, if he returned, everything would be different. The universe was about to learn what was only beginning to understand. Humans did not fight like other species, and that difference would change everything. The journey to Haven's Reach took 6 days. 6 days of watching the Coalition fleet move through space like a school of frightened fish. Spent most of his time in the Indomitable's observation deck, studying the crew and comparing them to the data he had collected on other species. The Coalition fleet was impressive on paper, 47 ships from 12 different species. They brought their massive battlecruisers, each one a testament to their honor-bound warrior culture. The Vesper contributed their perfect formation fighters, moving as one mind. The ships were smaller but equipped with the most advanced weapons in known space. Together, they should have been unstoppable. But everyone knew the truth. The Howler swarm had destroyed 12 civilizations, 12 entire species wiped from existence. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on. The coalition had survived only by avoiding them, by running whenever they appeared. On the third day, the fleet command called a war council, was invited as an observer. The meeting took place through holographic communication, with each species' commanders appearing as glowing images in the command center. Captain Minu represented the human forces. Lieutenant stood beside him, studying tactical displays. Admiral of the spoke first. His face was covered in ritual scars, marks of his many battles. The situation is clear. Haven's Reach cannot be defended. We must evacuate the colony and retreat to the barrier line. It is the only logical course of action. Commander of the Vesper agreed. Their collective voice hummed through the speakers. Our calculations show a 98% probability of total fleet destruction if we engage the Howlers. Evacuation is the only acceptable outcome. The representative, scholar, displayed probability matrices in the air. I have analyzed every recorded encounter with the Howler swarm. There is no scenario where direct engagement results in victory. The mathematics are absolute. Minu had been silent throughout the discussion. Now he stepped forward. What about the 3 million people on Haven's Reach? The evacuation ships can maybe carry 500,000 before the Howlers arrive. What happens to the rest? They will die, Admiral said bluntly. It is a tragedy, but it is reality. We cannot save everyone. Cannot or will not? Asked her voice sharp. Lieutenant, please, Scholar said softly. We understand your species is new to the coalition, but you must understand the Howlers. They have never been defeated. Every attempt to fight them has ended in complete annihilation. Running is not cowardice. It is survival. Minu pulled up his own tactical display. We have studied the Howler attack patterns. They rely on overwhelming numbers and biological integration of captured technology, but they have a weakness. Their command structure is centralized. If we can disrupt their queenships, the smaller units lose coordination. Admiral laughed. And how do you propose reaching their queenships through 2,000 lesser vessels? By going through them, Minu said simply. The silence that followed was deafening, watched as the other commanders exchanged looks of disbelief. That is suicide, Commander stated. Maybe, agreed. But if we succeed, we buy time for evacuation. Maybe we even stop them here. Haven's Reach is the first coalition world in their path. If we let them take it without a fight, they will know we are weak. They will keep coming. Scholar shook his head. Your species has been in space for less than a century. You do not understand the Howlers as we do. They are inevitable. They are death itself. We understand death just fine, Minu said quietly. We are asking for permission to engage. The 3 human ships will make the initial attack. We only ask that the rest of the fleet evacuate as many people as possible while we buy you time. Admiral studied Minu for a long moment. You know your ships will be destroyed. You know your crews will die. And yet you volunteer for this. Yes. Why? Minu looked directly at the Admiral. Because someone has to. There it was again. That phrase had heard from Private. He was beginning to understand it was not just words. It was something deeper, something that defined these humans. The vote was taken. The coalition fleet would evacuate Haven's Reach. The human ships were granted permission to engage the Howlers if they chose to do so. No other species volunteered to join them. Watched as the human commanders accepted this without complaint. They had not expected help. They had not asked for it. The meeting ended and the fleet continued its journey. But something had changed. Noticed crew members from other ships sending messages to the Indomitable. Some were prayers. Some were thanks. Many were apologies. On the 5th day, found Private in the ship's small recreation area. She was writing something on an old-fashioned paper notebook. He approached carefully. May I ask what you are writing? He said. She looked up startled, then smiled sadly. A letter to my family, in case I do not make it back. You expect to die. I expect to fight, she corrected. Death is just a possibility that comes with it. But you could request a transfer. You could join the evacuation ships. No one would blame you. Set down her pen. Observer, let me tell you a story. When I was 7 years old, my city was attacked by raiders, bad people with guns and ships. They came to take everything we had. My mother hid me and my sister in a basement. Then she and my father went upstairs to fight. They were not soldiers, they were teachers, but they fought anyway because someone had to. What happened? Asked, though he feared he knew. They died, but they gave us time. Time for the police to arrive. Time for us to survive. I lost my parents that day, but I learned something. Sometimes fighting is not about winning. Sometimes it is about giving others a chance to live. She picked up her pen again. That is why I am here. That is why we are all here. Had no response. His species had never faced such choices. They had always had the luxury of negotiation, of retreat, of mathematical solutions. For the first time, he wondered if that luxury had made them weak. Throughout the ship, similar scenes played out. Corporal gathered his Marines and shared stories of battles past. They sang old songs from Earth, songs about warriors and last stands. Captain Minu walked the corridors, speaking quietly with each crew member, making sure they understood what was coming. Found on the observation deck on the final night before arrival, they stood together, watching the stars streak past as the ship traveled through faster-than-light space. You should transfer to an evacuation ship, said. There is no reason for you to stay. I am an observer, replied. This is what I was sent to do, observe and understand humans. How can I understand if I run when you stay? Smiled. You might actually understand us better than most of the coalition already. She pointed to a distant star on the display. That is Haven's Reach. Tomorrow we will arrive. Tomorrow we will face something that has never been defeated. And tomorrow we will either die or we will prove that humans do not surrender easily. Are you afraid? Asked. Terrified, admitted. But fear is not the enemy. Giving up is the enemy. Every human on this ship is afraid, but not one of them will turn back. The next morning, the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Haven's Reach system. Immediately, sensors began screaming warnings. The Howler swarm was already there, a massive cloud of organic ships numbering over 200, with more arriving every minute. Long-range scans detected the main swarm behind them, 2,000 ships, maybe more. Admiral's voice came through on all frequencies. All coalition ships begin evacuation operations immediately. Stay away from the Howlers. Follow Protocol 7. Captain Minu opened a channel to his small fleet, 3 ships against an impossible enemy. This is Captain Minu of the Indomitable. Today we show the universe that humans do not run. Today we buy time for those who cannot fight. Today we charge. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady and certain. For those who will come after us, for Earth, all ships advance. The 3 human vessels turned toward the Howler swarm and accelerated. Behind them, the coalition fleet watched in stunned silence. Gripped the railing of the observation deck, his 3 eyes wide. He was about to witness something no one had ever seen before. Humans charging into battle against an enemy that had never known defeat. The Howler ships looked like nightmares given form. They were not built but grown, organic metal twisted into shapes that logic. They pulsed with a sickly green light, and even through the vacuum of space, imagined he could hear them screaming. 200 of these monsters hung between the human ships and Haven's Reach. All weapons online, reported from her station. Shields at maximum, target solutions locked. Captain Minu sat in his command chair, calm as still water. Fire when ready. The 3 human ships opened fire at once. Missiles streaked through space, followed by brilliant beams of energy. The first wave of Howler ships exploded in flashes of green fire. For a moment, felt hope. Maybe the humans had found a weakness. Maybe this would work. Then the Howlers returned fire. The display screens filled with incoming projectiles, biological missiles that twisted and turned, following their targets like living things, energy weapons that seemed to drain the very light from space. The Indomitable shook violently as the first hits landed. Shields flickered and died. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. "Shields down to 40%, called out. "Hull breaches on decks 7 and 9. "Redirect power from life support to weapons," Minu ordered. "Seal the damaged sections." Felt his breathing become labored as the oxygen levels dropped. Around him, human crew members pulled on emergency masks but continued working. No one complained. No one stopped. "Captain, the Relentless reports critical damage," a communication officer shouted. "They have lost main power." On the tactical display, watched as one of the 3 human ships went dark. The Howlers swarmed around it like insects. But even powerless, the Relentless kept fighting. Their crew fired manual weapons through broken hull sections, fighting the Howlers hand to hand as they boarded. "Corporal," Minu said into his comm, "prepare your Marines. We are going to give the Relentless some help." His face appeared on screen. Behind him, 24 Marines checked their weapons and sealed their combat suits. "Ready when you are, Captain." What happened next made question everything he knew about warfare. The Indomitable did not pull back to protect itself. Instead, it accelerated toward the swarm of Howlers surrounding the Relentless. They flew directly into the enemy formation. "Matching velocity with Howler vessel designated Alpha 7, announced. "Distance, 200 meters and closing." "Marines, you have 10 seconds until contact," Minu said. Rushed to the window and watched in horror. The Indomitable pulled alongside a massive Howler ship. A section of the human ship's hull exploded outward, deliberately breached from inside. Through the opening, 24 Marines launched themselves into the void. They had minimal protection, just combat suits and thruster packs. They flew through open space toward the enemy ship, weapons firing. Half of them died before reaching the Howler vessel. Enemy fire cut them down, their bodies spinning away into the darkness. But the rest made it. They crashed into the organic hull and began cutting their way inside with plasma torches. Led the way, his suit's speakers broadcasting his voice to all human ships. "Remember your training, fast and brutal. Make them pay for every meter." The Marines disappeared into the Howler ship. For 3 minutes there was no word. Then the massive vessel shuddered and broke apart from within. The Marines had somehow destroyed it from inside. Only 7 of them emerged from the wreckage, their suits damaged and leaking air. 3 made it back to the Indomitable. Was one of them, his suit covered in green blood and barely functioning. "Target destroyed," he reported, his breathing heavy. 17 Marines lost. "Understood," Minu said quietly. "Get to medical." "No time, sir. Where do you need us next?" The battle continued for 2 hours. The humans used tactics that no coalition species would ever consider. They let themselves be surrounded to create kill zones. They rammed damaged ships into clusters of Howlers. They fought with a ferocity that seemed impossible for organic beings. Private Squad was assigned to hold a breach point when Howlers managed to board the Indomitable. Watched through security cameras as the young woman and 9 others faced an endless wave of creatures. The Howlers were horrifying up close, part machine and part organic horror, each one twice the size of a human. The Marines held the corridor for 40 minutes. They fought with guns until the ammunition ran out. Then they fought with knives and bare hands. One by one they fell, was wounded 3 times but refused to retreat. When only 3 Marines remained, she made a decision. "Sir, I am sealing the breach," she said over the comm, "detonating remaining explosives." "Negative, Private," Minu replied. "We can send reinforcements." "No time, sir. If they get through here they reach the reactor. I am sorry." Watched as set the charges. The other 2 Marines understood what she was doing and stood with her. They held the line for 30 more seconds, just enough time, then triggered the explosives. The entire section collapsed, sealing the breach but killing everyone in it. "Breach sealed," reported, her voice hollow. "Squad lost." The Indomitable continued fighting. So did the remaining human ships. Against all odds, they had destroyed 40 Howler vessels, but the cost was devastating. One human ship was gone completely. Another was dead in space, crew evacuated. The Indomitable was barely functional, held together by emergency force fields and desperate repairs. Check the tactical display through tears. He did not know he could cry. His species did not cry. But watching these humans sacrifice themselves so casually, so willingly, something broke inside him. He understood now what Private had tried to tell him. Someone has to. "Captain," said softly, "long-range sensors are picking up new contacts." "The main swarm?" Minu asked. "Yes, sir, 2,000 ships. Arrival in 20 minutes. The command center fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. They had barely survived 200 howlers. 2,000 was impossible. Even for humans, there were limits. "Move to the communication station." His hands shook as he opened a channel to the Coalition fleet. They were still evacuating Haven's Reach, safely away from the battle. He had to tell them what he had witnessed. He had to make them understand. "Coalition Command, this is Observer aboard the Indomitable. I am sending a priority message to all ships." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The humans are not retreating. They have engaged the advance force and destroyed 40 enemy vessels at enormous cost. But the main swarm is arriving, 2,000 ships." His voice cracked. "They are not retreating. They will never retreat. Please, someone must witness what happens here. Someone must remember." He closed the channel. Captain Minu looked at him with those dark, tired eyes. "Thank you, Observer, for staying, for watching. Whatever happens next, at least someone will know we tried." "All crew," Minu announced on shipwide comm. "The main swarm will arrive in 18 minutes. We are heavily damaged. Our weapons are depleted. By all logical analysis, we cannot win." He paused. "But logic has never stopped humans before. We have bought time for 3 million people to evacuate. We have shown the Howlers that someone will fight back. That alone makes this worthwhile. However, if anyone wishes to abandon ship and try to reach the evacuation fleet, you may do so. I will not think less of you." No one moved. No one left their station. "Very well," Minu said with a small smile. "Then let us show these monsters what it means to face humanity. Lieutenant, prepare for one final charge. When the swarm arrives, we go straight through them. Maximum speed, all remaining weapons fire. If we are going to die, we die moving forward." "Yes, sir," said. Her hands moved across her console, calculating one last suicide run. Return to the observation deck. In the distance, he could see the approaching swarm. It looked like a dark cloud blotting out the stars. 2,000 ships, each one a killing machine that had destroyed countless civilizations. Against them, one barely functional human vessel and a handful of determined crew members. It should have been the end. It should have been a meaningless last stand. But as watched the humans prepare for their final charge, he realized something profound. They had already won. Not the battle, but something more important. They had proven that some beings would stand against impossible odds. They had inspired him, a logical scientist, to stay and witness their end rather than flee to safety. The swarm arrived. The display filled with thousands of red warning icons. The Howlers came like a tsunami of death, ready to sweep away the last human resistance. And the Indomitable, battered and broken, accelerated toward them. But as the human ship began its final charge, something unexpected happened. On tactical display, 12 new contacts appeared. Ships turning away from the evacuation fleet. Ships accelerating toward the battle. Ships from different species, different worlds, different philosophies. The Coalition was returning. Not all of them, but enough. Inspired by human courage, 12 ships had chosen to fight rather than watch brave beings die alone. Felt something surge through him, hope, and the determination to fight alongside these impossible humans. He left the observation deck and ran toward the weapons station. The coalition ships arrived like angels of war, their weapons blazing. 2 battlecruisers led the charge, their honor-bound warriors roaring battle cries over open channels. 5 research vessels, not built for combat but armed nonetheless, formed a defensive line. 3 Vesper fighters moved in perfect formation, their hive mind coordinating with deadly precision. And 2 ships from species did not immediately recognize, but their presence alone said everything. Coalition vessels, this is Captain Menu. The human commander's voice rang out across all frequencies. You should not be here. This is a suicide mission. Admiral's face appeared on the display. Then it seems we learned something from you humans. Honor means nothing if you only show it when victory is certain. Today, we fight together. Or die together, Commander added, their collective voice humming with determination. Menu's expression showed shock, then something else. Pride, gratitude, hope. Then let us make them remember this day. All ships on my mark, full charge into the swarm. Target their command vessels. Make every shot count. Mark. 13 ships, battered and outnumbered, accelerated toward 2,000 Howler vessels. It should have been the end. But something changed in that moment. The coalition forces were not fighting like they normally fought. They were fighting like humans. A battlecruiser took devastating hits to its forward shields but did not slow down. It crashed directly into a cluster of howlers, its captain screaming defiance until the ship exploded. The blast took out 17 enemy vessels. The ships, so careful and calculating in every recorded battle, threw away their mathematical models. They targeted the largest howlers, knowing they would draw fire, knowing they would die. But each one destroyed enemy command ships before falling. Found himself at a weapons station, firing again and again. His hands shook. His 3 hearts pounded. Every lesson his people had taught him about careful warfare evaporated. He fired at anything that moved, screaming words he did not know he knew. Beside him, a human weapons officer named grinned through bleeding lips. That's it, observer, make them bleed. The battle became chaos. Ships exploded on both sides. The vacuum of space filled with debris and fire. The Howlers adapted quickly, focusing their fire on the coalition ships. But every time they destroyed one vessel, 2 more charged through the gap. It was like fighting a disease that grew stronger with each infection. Corporal led another boarding party. This time he had volunteers from other species, a massive warrior, 2 Vesper drones operating as one, even a scientist who had never held a weapon. They flew through space toward a Howler command ship, and somehow, impossibly, they made it inside. Watched through the combat cameras. His team fought through corridors made of pooling organic material. The Howlers were everywhere, but the mixed coalition team adapted. They used his superior strength to tear through barriers. The Vesper drones moved in perfect coordination, covering angles human eyes could not watch. They used his mathematical mind to predict enemy movements. And limping on an injured leg led them forward. His suit was damaged beyond repair, leaking air. He should have been dead, but he kept moving, kept fighting, kept inspiring those around him. Target located, reported. The neural core, it's huge, going to need all our explosives. Plant them and get out, Menu ordered. That's a command, Corporal. Understood, sir. They worked quickly, placing charges throughout the massive chamber that housed the Howler Queenship's brain. It was beautiful in a horrible way, a pooling mass of organic technology that controlled hundreds of lesser vessels. The charges were set. The team began their retreat. But the Howlers knew what was happening. They sealed the exit corridors. The team was trapped. Charges are on a timer, said calmly. We have 3 minutes. I can manually detonate them if needed. No, the warrior growled. We fight our way out together. They tried. They fought with everything they had. But the Howlers were too many. One by one, the team members fell. The Vesper drones sacrificed themselves to buy time. The scientist took a hit meant for and died with equations on his lips. The warrior held a corridor alone for 2 full minutes before being overwhelmed. Was the last one standing, his back against the neural core, his weapon empty. He looked into the camera one final time. "Captain, it has been an honor. Tell my family I did my duty," he smiled. "Someone has to." He triggered the charges. The queenship exploded from within. The blast was massive, a miniature sun blooming in the darkness of space. The explosion chain reacted through the swarm. Without their command vessel, hundreds of Howler ships lost coordination. They began firing on each other, their organic programming failing. "All ships press the advantage," Minyu shouted. "Target the confused vessels." The coalition forces poured fire into the disorganized swarm. Ships that had been invincible minutes ago now died by the dozens. The tide of battle shifted, not toward victory but toward possibility. For the first time in recorded history, the Howlers were losing. But the cost was staggering. Of the 13 coalition ships that had charged into battle, only 3 remained functional. The Indomitable was one of them, barely held together by emergency force fields and prayers. The crew was exhausted, wounded, running on pure determination. Collapsed at her station. A piece of shrapnel had pierced her side, but she had said nothing, continuing to work through the pain. Medical teams rushed to help her, but she pushed them away. "Not yet. Battle is not over." Captain Minyu stood from his chair and moved to her station, taking over tactical control. "Lieutenant, you are relieved. That is an order." "Sir, I can still fight." "You have fought enough. Let others carry the weight for a while." As medical teams carried away, a familiar face appeared on the bridge. Private, alive despite having watched her die. She was covered in burns and bandages, one arm in a makeshift sling, but she was standing. She had survived the breach explosion by pure luck, blown clear by the blast into a sealed section. "Permission to return to duty, sir," she said. Minyu looked at her, this young woman who had already given everything and was ready to give more. "Granted. Take weapons station 3. We need everyone." Moved to her station with determination. Her good hand moved across the controls, targeting and firing with steady precision despite her injuries. The battle raged for 3 more hours. The Howlers kept coming, but their numbers were finally decreasing. More coalition ships arrived from the evacuation fleet. Not many, but some. Word had spread about what was happening, about species fighting together, about humans teaching others to stand against impossible odds. A young pilot named transmitted a message before making a kamikaze run into a Howler cruiser. "Observer, tell my people. Tell them we can be brave too." A Vesper collective, normally so cautious, deliberately drew fire to protect a damaged human vessel. "We understand now. Some things are worth dying for." A captain, mortally wounded but still fighting. "We thought we knew honor. The humans showed us we had forgotten what it truly means." Recorded it all, every act of courage, every sacrifice, every moment where beings from different worlds chose to stand together. His initial report about human military doctrine seemed trivial now. This was not about tactics or weapons. This was about something deeper, something that transcended species and logic. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last Howler ship retreated into faster-than-light space. The swarm had broken. For the first time in thousands of years, they had been defeated. The silence that followed was deafening. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They were all too tired, too wounded, too aware of what it had cost. "All ships status report," Minyu said quietly. The responses came slowly. Of the 50-plus coalition ships that had been present, 19 remained. 7 human vessels had participated in the battle. 3 survived. Of the crew of the Indomitable, 147 souls had started the day. 62 remained alive. Haven's Reach had been saved. 3 million people evacuated successfully. The colony intact. The price had been paid in blood and sacrifice. Captain Minu stood alone in the command center, looking at the list of names. The dead, so many dead, approached him carefully. "Captain, you won. You defeated the Howlers. You saved millions of lives." Minu turned to him with empty eyes. "One, observer, look at the cost, look at the names. The scientist whose name I never learned, the warriors who died with honor, the Vesper who learned to sacrifice. We did not win, we survived. There is a difference. But you achieved what no one thought possible. At a price no one should have to pay." Minu looked out at the debris field, the remains of ships and beings who had fought together. "But you are right about one thing. We showed the universe that the Howlers can be beaten. We showed that different species can stand together. Maybe that is enough. Maybe that is why we had to charge." Placed a hand on Minu's shoulder, a gesture of comfort his species rarely used. "Someone had to," he said softly. Minu smiled sadly. "Yes, someone had to." 3 months after the Battle of Haven's Reach, stood in his office at Station Omega-7, staring at the final version of his report. It had taken him 12 weeks to write, rewrite, and finally accept that words could never truly capture what he had witnessed. The document was over 400 pages long, filled with tactical analysis, casualty reports, and strategic recommendations. But the title was simple: Why We Fear Them and Why We Need Them. The Coalition Council had summoned him to present his findings in person. It was an honor, though felt no pride, only the weight of responsibility. He had to make them understand what humans had taught him, what they had taught the entire galaxy. The council chamber was a massive circular room with representatives from every coalition species. They sat in their designated sections, some in physical form, others as holographic projections. All eyes turned to as he entered. "Observer," the council speaker began, an ancient with silver skin and 4 eyes. "You have submitted your report on human military doctrine. The council has reviewed it. Your findings are troubling. You claim that humans possess something you call indomitable will. Explain." Activated his presentation. Images from the battle appeared in the air above him. Ships charging into certain death. Marines fighting in corridors against impossible odds. Species working together in ways they never had before. "Honored Council, I was sent to study human warfare. I expected to document new weapons, new tactics, new technologies. What I found was something entirely different." He pulled up casualty figures. "Humans accept losses that other species consider unacceptable. They volunteer for missions that mathematical models show as impossible. They do not fight to win. They fight because they choose to fight." "This sounds like foolishness, not a military advantage," a representative said. "Accepting death is not strategy." "That is what I thought," agreed. "Until I watched humans charge into a battle they could not win. Until I watched them inspire others to do the same. The Howler swarm had never been defeated. Every species that faced them followed logical protocols: retreat, evacuate, survive. And the Howlers kept coming." He changed the display to show the battle timeline. "Humans did not retreat. They charged. And in charging, they showed us something we had forgotten. Sometimes survival is not enough. Sometimes you must stand and fight, not because you will win, but because surrender means the end of everything you value." A Vesper collective spoke, their voice harmonizing. "But the cost: 89% of human forces died. How is this acceptable?" "It is not acceptable," said softly. "But it was necessary, and more importantly, it was effective. The Howlers broke for the first time in recorded history, not because we had better weapons, not because we outsmarted them, but because we refused to run, because humans taught us that courage is contagious." The chamber fell silent. Continued, his 3 hearts pounding. "I have a recommendation for the council. We must establish what I am calling human protocol. A new military doctrine based on human principles, not to replace our existing strategies but to supplement them. For those moments when retreat is not an option, for those battles where someone must stand." The council speaker leaned forward. You are suggesting we adopt human recklessness across the entire coalition. No, honored speaker. I am suggesting we adopt human courage when it is needed. We can still be logical. We can still be careful. But we must also be willing to fight when the alternative is extinction. The humans have shown us how. The vote was taken. By a narrow margin, human protocol was adopted. Training programs would be established. Human instructors would teach coalition forces new tactics. It was not a complete change, but it was a beginning. After the meeting, returned to his quarters and found a message waiting. It was from Captain Minu, now promoted to Admiral after the battle. He had been placed in charge of Coalition Special Forces, training mixed-species units in human tactics. Observer, I heard about your report. Thank you for understanding what we tried to show you. The Council may have adopted human protocol, but the real change is not in tactics. It is in mindset. You learned that. You proved it when you stayed aboard the Indomitable and fought beside us. That is what we needed. Not allies who fight like humans, but allies who understand why we fight. Take care of yourself, friend. The galaxy will need observers like you in the days to come. Admiral Minu smiled, an expression his species rarely made. He had changed during those 6 days of battle. They all had. The next day he attended a ceremony at Haven's Reach. The colony had been saved, and the survivors wanted to honor those who died protecting them. A massive monument had been built in the central plaza, a black stone wall with names carved into it. Thousands of names. Human, Vesper, and others, all who had died in the battle. Lieutenant was there, now captain, walking with a slight limp from her injuries. She had been given command of the rebuilt Indomitable. Private stood beside her in a crisp new uniform. She had been promoted to sergeant and given a position as a training instructor. Her job was to teach coalition soldiers about sacrifice and courage. They stood together before the monument, humans and aliens, survivors and families of the fallen. A name caught eye, Corporal. Below his name was a simple inscription. He stayed behind so others could live. There were so many names. The captain who had ordered his ship to ram the enemy. The scientist who had never fired a weapon before but died with one in his hands. The Vesper collective that had learned to value individual sacrifice. Young pilot who had shown his people that even the logical can be brave. At the base of the monument, words were carved in every coalition language. Someone had to. Spoke at the ceremony, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. We did not want this battle. We did not want to lose so many friends, so many brave souls, but we were given a choice. Stand and fight or run and let millions die. We chose to stand. And in standing, we learned that we are stronger together than we ever were apart. She gestured to the monument. These names represent every species in the coalition. We came from different worlds, different cultures, different beliefs. But on that day, we were one. We were beings who chose courage over fear, who chose sacrifice over safety, who chose to fight because someone had to. Stepped forward, placing a hand on the cold stone. I have been asked to teach others what humans know about warfare, but the truth is, we did not teach anyone anything new. We simply reminded you of what you already knew. That courage exists in every species. That sacrifice is universal. That when pushed to the edge, every being in this galaxy can choose to stand rather than kneel. Found himself crying again, those alien tears that his species was not supposed to shed. But he was not alone. Warriors wept openly. Vesper collectives hummed songs of mourning. Even the logical bowed their heads in sorrow and respect. After the ceremony, walked through Haven's Reach. The city was alive, 3 million people going about their daily lives. Children played in parks. Families shared meals. Workers rebuilt damaged sections. They were alive because others had chosen to die. He passed a school where human instructors were teaching young coalition soldiers. Through the window, he saw demonstrating combat techniques to a mixed class. But more importantly, she was teaching them about choice, about courage, about standing together. In a medical facility, he found former patients recovering from the battle. Species that had never worked together before now shared rooms, shared stories, shared hopes for the future. A warrior played a human card game with a scientist. A Vesper drone taught human children a song from there. The galaxy was changing, not quickly but surely. Humans had shown them a different path. That evening sat in his office and began a new report, not about tactics or strategies but about what he had truly learned. He titled it, The Human Lesson, Why Courage Matters More Than Logic. He wrote about Private, who had been terrified but fought anyway, about Corporal, who had stayed behind so others could live, about Captain Minu, who had led from the front and carried the weight of every loss, about the warriors who had rediscovered honor, about the who had learned that mathematics cannot calculate the value of a life, about the Vesper who had understood that individuals matter. But mostly, he wrote about a simple phrase that had changed everything. Someone has to. The universe is vast, wrote in his conclusion. It is filled with wonders and horrors, with beauty and danger. For thousands of years, the coalition survived by being careful, by being logical, by avoiding fights we could not win. We survived, but we did not live. We existed in fear of things like the Howlers, accepting that some battles could not be won. Then humans joined us. Young, reckless, emotional humans who did not know they were supposed to be afraid. They saw impossible odds and charged anyway. They saw certain death and volunteered. They saw us ready to abandon millions and they said no. We fear humans because they remind us of what we have lost, the courage to stand, the will to fight, the understanding that some things are worth dying for. We fear them because they are everything we used to be before we became too logical, too careful, too afraid. But we need them, because in a universe full of threats, in a galaxy that demands we sometimes choose between survival and surrender, we need beings who will stand, who will fight, who will say with conviction and certainty, someone has to. Finish the report and send it to every coalition world. It would be read by millions. Some would dismiss it as emotion over logic. Some would argue humans were still too reckless. But some hoped would understand. The universe was a dangerous place. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more moments when retreat was the logical choice and standing was suicide. But now the coalition had humans, and humans had taught them that logic is not enough, that survival without dignity is not truly living, that sometimes you charge into battle not because you can win, but because it is right. Looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there, new threats waited. New horrors like the Howlers would emerge. The galaxy would test them again. But now they would be ready, not because they had better weapons or superior tactics, but because they had learned the human lesson. They had learned that courage is a choice, that standing together makes you stronger, that when faced with impossible odds, you do not ask if you can win. You ask who will stand, and you answer someone has to. And now, thanks to humans, the answer would always be, we will.